I've been the research leader here. I probably didn't even introduce myself, did I? Brandon Bestelmeyer. 300 square mile area of withdrawn public land for rangeland research. So that means it's public land, but it is intended exclusively for rangeland research. And that's been the case since 1912.
Well, off and on. They're over there for about 4 months. I think it's
As we head toward our stop one, you're going to look out and see little patches of black gramma grass that are left. So you essentially see the sequence of transition in reverse as we head down this road.
So this is Station 1. We're talking about grassland, shrubland transitions in future decades. Phenology is actually the study of seasonal transitions, and this applies to both plants and animals. We're going to be talking today mainly about plants and how kind of that phenomenon, or the kind of aspect of the natural history of grasses and shrubs that have kind of coexisted in these landscapes for a very, very, very long time. And this land that we're standing on now is historically dominated by C4 grasses.
Thank you all for the beautiful amphitheater. A great day. The change in temperature that was measured in the last 50 years. So this is change in temperature from 50 years ago till the present time.
really red.
Really red. So what is your take on message? What happened in the last 50 years with this region where we are here? It became hotter, drier, and more variable, correct? This is a rainout shelter here that in this is a demonstration for you. We have 164 distributed all over the Jornada range. This particular one is intercepting 80% of incoming precipitation. So this is how it works. So we create a gradient from very dry conditions to very wet conditions.
I some trivia questions for you that if you listened to Brandon's talk this morning, you should be able to answer some of these.
Some of the others that are two-section.
Okay, I'm Debra Peters. I'm an ARS scientist with the Jornada. I'm also the lead scientist on the Jornada Basin LTER project. So if you have your paper, we're going to talk about what we've historically called the scrape site, and we're now calling the grow site because we have a lot of perennial grasses on it. So this, if you look at your paper, this area here is a 100-meter diameter. Originally, it was scraped of all vegetation. The vegetation was moved off, as well as the top surface soil to the side, and then the soil was placed back onto the area, and the plants were removed. Okay, that was in 1996. They scraped this. The sand started to move, right? So the winds are moving in this direction, and this created all of these sands from here moved over here. It created this duneland, right? So this topsoil is now over here. Okay. So then what happened in 2004, it starts to rain, and we started to get annual plants on here. So we're actually restoring grasses at the Jornada.
I am Bob Schooley from the University of Illinois, and also a co-PI at the Jornada. And my topic is going to be on wildlife and wildlife responses to shrub encroachment and to attempts to restore desert grasslands. Starting in around 2006-2007, it got really ramped up. The program was kind of formalized as Restore New Mexico. And I've got a figure on the handout. There are some years where the BLM Las Cruces District Office was treating 35 to 40,000 hectares.
And so it's possible that wind velocities in this area are lower than wind velocities a little bit further north. And therefore the effects of wind erosion have been historically less severe here than further north.
Hey, Laura.
My name is Sarah McCord. I'm an ecologist here at the Jornada. and I work largely with the standardized monitoring programs that the Jornada supports in various places. And so what I want to talk today about is a little bit about why we came to the need for standardized monitoring, what standardized monitoring looks like within the Jornada program, and then what we're doing with some of that standardized monitoring data. So, monitoring manual for grassland, shrubland, and savanna ecosystems. The methods are described in detail.
I'm Nick Webb. So we're now sort of near the middle of the Jornada's Wind Erosion Network site, and I'll tell you a bit about the network and why we established it, what kinds of data we collect and what we're doing with those data. And it's very difficult to model wind erosion in rangelands because of the complexity of the vegetation, the structures of it, the fact that we've got grasses, shrubs, physical soil crusts, biological crusts, all make the system very complex to model the processes in. So each of the network sites like this is a hectare, so it's 100 by 100 metres. We have a 10-metre meteorological tower in the middle with some fairly basic instrumentation that we have at all of the sites.
How many acres per animal unit for the Jornada? The original estimate from a rancher was that this country could carry 18 acres per cow per year.
Hi everybody, welcome to Station 4, Strategies for Sustainable Livestock Production. I'm Sheri Spiegal, I'm an animal scientist with the Jornada Experimental Range. So as Brandon mentioned earlier today, the Long-Term Agroecosystem Research Network is one of our core programs here at the Jornada. And so we are one of 18 sites here, so I don't know if you still have your handouts, but we're one of 18 sites in this research network that covers the whole country. So together, the research network it was formed to come up with strategies to increase productivity and increase profitability, but keep the environmental footprint of agriculture down. So I mean, this is a pretty tall order, but we're working together to come up with new strategies.
Good afternoon, my name is Osvaldo. I work here at the Jornada Experimental Range. My experience with the Criollo cattle come from South America. I was able to work with these cattle down there, so that's where we started having some idea of what we could do with these cattle here in the desert environment. What I'd like to talk about first is that the distribution of Criollo, without saying any specific biotype, Criollo extend from the way down there from Tierra del Fuego down in Argentina, all the way up in the southwestern United States, and now we have some going into California, and we even find some now in Canada.
The Criollo cows tend to range out farther, and the British crossbreds tend to stick around closer to water, probably waiting for the feed. We don't know. But we've now repeated these studies at a site in Mexico. We've just finished up a similar study at a site in Argentina, and with a slightly different type of Criollo over there, and we see very similar patterns. The second collar, the black collar on the cows and the little collar on the calves, is what we call a proximity logger. That is basically a radio collar that logs every contact event of the mother and the calf.
Myself, I'm Emile Elias, I'm the active director of the Southwest Climate Hub. This is one of 10 climate hubs across the nation, so you are at one of our 10 locations. We were formed in February of 2014, so we are approaching our 5-year mark. We're approaching our 5-year review. This is an interesting organization, the Climate Hubs. We really grew up within USDA. We are a USDA organization. But we're basically what they're calling one USDA, in that many different parts of USDA interface within the Climate Hub network.
So when we're looking at climate data, we really need to put it into the context of what's happened in the past. And the most accessible data is actually from the NOAA's Cooperative Observer Network. This is available from most areas in the country from about 1895 onwards. 20th century, there's not much of a trend going on until we get to the mid-century and then a slight peak in the 1950s. But then from the 1970s onward, a strong trend in rising temperatures.
So I'm Julian and I'm the fellow with the USDA Southwest Climate Hub. I like to introduce myself as an engineer who likes to talk to people. That's my background, so that's why I'm all about the data, but what can we learn from the data? Well, we can provide them in a way that anyone can not necessarily make these figures, but discover these data and do some sort of analysis.
This is one of the few presentations where you are not only permitted to, but in fact encouraged to mess with your phones instead of listening to me, doing anything but downloading the app and registering it. PKS, search on that and pop up and download it for free. And then all you need to do is register a Gmail address, and we'll explain why that's done later. Broaden our perspective. So until now today, we're focusing on research to really focus on the Jornada, research that has relevance to deserts around the world.
This project is led by a team based in Las Cruces, and we have a web designer, graphic designer, and then student developers who actually develop the app for us.
My name is Shawn Salley-LandPKS-Soil ID. I'm a soil scientist that's been working on the land PKS for the last 2 years. I'm going to talk briefly about this next thing that we're developing that we're hoping will be online at the end of this year. To get at that soils information, ecological site information, given what soil we're on. The way we've approached that is to dig the soil. But ultimately there'll be a couple different tiers. One tier where, based upon your GPS location alone, you can access the dominant component of the soil that you're on or some other soils information.
My name is Bestelmeyer, and I'm the Executive Director of the Asombro Institute for Science Education. And our role here, working with the Jornada, is to really try to take the amazing information, discoveries, the research approaches that are happening here at the Jornada and try to figure out a way to translate them better into a community that needs it a lot, and that's our K-12 or kindergarten through 12th grade community of teachers and students. We're scientists, and we try to take the information that the scientists are producing and creating here and figure out a way to translate it into age-appropriate materials, developmentally appropriate materials that work for the needs of the K-12 community.
Recognizing past mistakes, right? It was, what are the things that we used to think we knew, or we used to think were true, that we now know we didn't know, or we now know were wrong, or we now know we were making mistaken assumptions about these systems. And he mentioned three, right? Equilibrium, stability, homogeneity. The Jornada is pushing forward and looking for answers that are not simply throwing up your hands. Go.
So we're going to ask you to do this for about 20 minutes. So a 20-minute discussion. The implications for understanding where, how, and when dust travels in rangeland science has probably made one of the biggest vacancies in the room for people that are managing that and dealing with it on the user end. The governments and public health folks aren't at these tables, and so we're hoping that in 20 or 40 years maybe they will.
As ranching and open landscapes go through years and years, the succession of ranches and how ranches have changed, not only have changed from one generation to the next, but what will that look like in 40 years?
One of the things that came up was the implication of herbicide use on soil health, soil microbes.
So our table talks primarily about how much technology has helped facilitate data collection, but the technology is great, but we still need the people.
Also, patterns of variability with respect to modeling. So now that we have a better grasp on the notion that things are variable, hopefully in the future we'll be able to produce better models that take that variability into account.
Something else that came up in our group was considering the role of atmospheric processes, and that's something that we really haven't gotten into at all beyond basically touching on general climate trends and that kind of thing in the Jornada.
Reversing shrubland transitions, genetics. Actually, we talked about genetics, plant genetics, and possibly incorporating that for future efforts.
From more of an animal and grazing perspective, we were thinking about maybe breaking down some of the paradigms that exist with
grasses and cattle, and thinking about what we could move forward with into the future in terms of different types of animals or different types of cattle that would do better in a more shrubby environment.
Do you want to announce it or should I? The beer is cold. Thank you, everyone.